alliances, or do you think this is still not quite there yet?
Domestic politics, where it's said that there are no permanent enemies and no permanent friends. The same is true for geopolitics. And the SCO is turning out to be a platform where alternate conversations can be had. And just like for a decade, we have had the China plus one strategy from a supply side perspective. I think given that the US administration has put a slew of tariffs on the rest of the world, there is a US plus one strategy that seems to be evolving from a demand side. And so we see the demand side being discussed in the SCO. Just to put some comparisons, the core member countries' economies add up to a size which is larger than the US economy. So there is some belief that there could be an alternative to the market that the US provides. But having said that, there cannot be an overnight switch from one to another. The change of supply chains, the change of demand takes an enormous amount of time to readjust, to restructure. And probably what we'll move towards is both the US opening up in the subsequent months and going back to a bit of business as usual, while new markets also open up. And there is a resilience from a demand perspective for alternate markets, rather than many economies being completely dependent on the US market and therefore getting badly hit. And so the SCO provides a forum for those alternate conversations that are going on in Tianjin as we speak.
Thank you, Jaijit Bhattacharya, for sharing that. Now I would like to ask Andrew, Professor Andrew, what do you think? Do you think we are seeing a reorganization? What do you think this SCO summit will have as an effect?
Well, I don't think it's going to have a very dramatic effect at all. And the reason is this. China sees the SCO like it sees BRICS and various other bilateral arrangements as institutionalizing its leadership of the global south and its leadership of what they call a counter-hegemonic anti-US.
So as long as India goes into the conversation with its eyes wide open in terms of using it for the purpose of furthering India's interest, it should not be a matter of concern. Now, saying that SCO is largely a China-driven body, yes, that's how it started. In fact, if you look at the member countries, they are the members which are largely bordering China, and a few members that are encircling India, not really bordering India. And there's a difference in those two words. And therefore, you see, seems to be a Sinocentric body emerging. But if that body does not mature into a rule-based organization, if it continues to allow powers that come in whose hands are drenched in blood of terrorism and of killing innocent people, and they're sitting as equals on that table, then such an organization doesn't have much of a future. Unfortunately, we have seen that happening again and again in the world, starting from League of Nations, the collapse of which led to World War II, and then the United Nations not being a very effective organization, which has led to so many wars happening in the world in the last 75 years. So clearly, we are still looking for a rule-based organization. And in the meantime, India is not leaning towards the US, India is not leaning towards China, India is leaning towards India. And being 16% of the global population, that's what India is looking for. And with the hope that India can probably bring in a rule-based global system, which is truly rule-based. It's not somebody else's rule being followed by the rest of the world, but it's a rule that is evolved by consensus, where the global south finds a voice, and there is parity between nations. There are no superior nations and no underdog nations. And that's hopefully the world that one will start seeing in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And hopefully that's what India will lead into. And SCO is just one more stepping stone towards that larger vision.
Thank you very much, Jaijit Bhattacharya and Professor Andrew, for both sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic, and we will come back for the discussion. Now, Russian President, what do you think?
Well, as I said, all relationships are based on the mutual interest of each country. In fact, that's something that Professor Latham also kind of laid out, that historically, the relationship between nations have been driven by their interests and by the powers that they enjoy against each other. And that will continue to play out if Russia continues to be militarily and economically relevant. It'll have a say. It'll have it'll get what it wants to get from the rest of the world. And I don't see that in the near future that's going to degrade. In fact, in the last 3 years, while Russia has been at war with Israel, and there has been considerable degradation of the Russian population, because if you look at the young population, a very significant part of that population has got degraded in the conflict with Ukraine. In spite of that, we see the Russian economy growing and being resilient, and we don't see Russia as a country ebbing militarily, and therefore we don't see that the relationship between Russia and China is going to impact how Russia is seen in the rest of the world. It'll be how Russia is in itself, which will impact how Russia will be seen in the rest of the world. And obviously, it's leveraging its relationship with China, in fact, even its relationship with North Korea, in terms of getting soldiers in for the war that it is fighting in its Eastern Front. It will try and leverage its relationships. And that's really what the SCO is, where the rest of the economies, which seem to be kind of adversarial from a US perspective, are working out alternative arrangements which are beneficial for each of these economies.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Now, I would like to look at the strikes that are continuing to happen between these Russia and Ukraine. Now, Professor Andrew, with Russia intensifying and also Ukraine intensifying strikes they both striking each other and they continue. How might this impact its Russia's relationship